This is what my cinematic FPV footage used to look like, and this is what my cinematic FPV footage looks like now. So what exactly did I do over the past 4 years that helped make such a visible change? Well, today I'm going to show you step by step what the differences are, run you through a basic method that anyone can actually do to achieve it without editing, and then a slightly more advanced method that yields way better results for just a tiny little bit extra work. So that does beg the question, what are the things that make all the difference from having normal looking footage to, well, cinematic footage? You see, this is all very subjective. Even the word cinematic, some people are gonna hate it. But in my opinion, cinematic FPV drone footage can all be summarized up into this 5-stage chain. You see, if any one of the links within the chain is missing, it ends up falling apart and you're left disappointed that your chain isn't working. And we don't want not working chains. Is that even English? Not working chains? Who knows, but you want your chain to work, right? So the first 3 links in this chain are all to be done before you shoot any footage whatsoever. So it is entirely vital to nail these 3 before you next head on out to shoot. It's also important to note here that this video is not the video where you're gonna be getting like, go here to change these settings and go into this specific menu, because I mean, heck, I don't know if you're using a GoPro, a DJI camera, walk snail video system, Insta360, whatever one you're using, I have no idea, and there are simply way too many different places and different names for things, so I'm going to tell you the settings, you can find them, and we'll adjust them together. Alright, so for the first link, you're going to be wanting to turn something way the heck down, that is generally always turned way the heck up from the factory. In fact, I actually made a video a little while back praising Insta360 for finally adding the setting to their cameras, as beforehand it was just wrecking the video's end results. And even more recently, I've actually had to make a specific mention of this within the DJI Neo First Impressions video. So what is this annoying thing called? Well, it's called sharpening. Now, what it essentially does is it cranks up the sharpness of the edges of objects in your video, which is the exact opposite of what we're actually aiming for with a cinematic shot. The supposed general idea behind the added sharpening is that on smaller screens like a phone, it's meant to make the footage look clearer and crisper, but in my opinion at least, I just think it makes it look like crap. Traditionally, cinema is all filmed on nice soft film cameras, and sure, for the most part, I'm certain that a little bit of sharpening isn't going to ruin your life, but what companies try to do with it is cover up the fact that they use a crap lens on the camera, or that the image quality just isn't that good in the first place. And when you use something like sharpening to just cover up your crappy work, it looks really bad. So, find your sharpness setting and bring it down to the lowest setting that you possibly can. I reckon you'll find the differences pretty outrageous. I mean, here's the difference between sharpening and no sharpening on the new DJI Neo. To me, it just looks so much better without it. Moving on to the second and third links in our chain. For these 2, you're going to be needing to add an extra piece to the front of whatever camera you're using. Basically, what this piece is doing is it's pretty much doing this. It's grabbing a pair of sunnies, and it's just putting it on over your lens, so I can't see anything. Putting it on over the lens, and it's reducing the amount of light that is coming into the camera, pretending that my eyes in this case are the camera. You might have actually seen or heard of these before, but if you haven't, they're called ND filters. To understand why you need to reduce the amount of light that goes into your camera, you first need to understand the shutter on your camera. To explain this in the simplest way possible, all we need to do is touch on what motion blur is and why that's so important. This is something that you naturally see with your own eyes. Like, if you take your hand right now and you wave it in front of you, have a look at that and you can actually see that there is motion blur. It's not all tack sharp the whole time. So to make your footage as cinematic as possible, you'll be wanting to replicate that same motion blur. I don't know why I'm waving, but you'll be wanting to replicate the same motion blur that you actually see in real life, so that you keep your footage looking as close to natural for the eye watching it. That then brings us over to the second part of the equation, the shutter. Now, your shutter controls 2 things at the same time. The first is how much motion blur your video has, and the second is how bright or dark your video turns out to be. The higher the shutter number gets, the darker your footage becomes, and also the less motion blur it will produce. Of course, the other side to this is that the lower your shutter number gets, the lighter your footage becomes, and the more motion blur it also produces. So at this point, you might be wondering what the perfect shutter is to get that natural amount of motion blur into your footage, right? And well, good news here is that there's actually already a rule in the photography world that targets exactly this. Use double the shutter speed to that of your frames per second. So A good example here with an FPV is if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, and you probably are, you want your shutter to be at 1/60th. Personally, I like to bend these rules a little bit. I use the 1/60th if I'm flying slow and steady, and then I actually up it to 1/120th if I'm flying a bit more rough or if it's windy. I find if I'm always flying at 1/60th and I'm being rough on the controls, the footage actually ends up coming out a little bit too blurry whenever I change directions or if I make quick corrections with my moves. So now you know how to get the perfect motion blur using your shutter. You're going to find that in most situations at 1/60th, your video is just going to look white, washed out, and super overexposed. So you now need to limit the amount of light that is going into your camera, and that's where our tiny sunglasses come straight on into the picture. Super bright days require a darker ND filter, usually something around an ND32. Cloudy days, you'll find you don't want as dark of a pair of sunglasses on your camera, so something between ND8 and ND16 will suit you pretty damn well. Then that brings us over to my personal favorite time to film, sunrise or sunset. Usually, thanks to the limited amount of light around, you can usually get away with no ND filters at all, or at the very most an ND4. It's all dependent on how much light there is coming into your camera, so you'll need to adjust accordingly, but once you've locked off that shutter number to 1/60th or something similar, you're just going to be able to swap around the ND filters until you find one that works for your day. By this stage though, you might find that no matter what ND filter you end up putting onto your camera, the video always seems to brighten itself up again on its own. Now, this is usually caused by another camera setting that is only good for one thing: lightening up your video. This magical setting is called ISO or ISO, and majority of the time out of the factory it's actually normally set to auto. All ISO does is it digitally cranks up the sensitivity of your camera to light, which I know does sound a little bit like bloody magic, but this magic comes at a massive cost. The more we crank up our ISO to make our video look brighter, the more digital noise or artifacts that we end up getting in the darker parts. This digital noise looks awful, and so we actually want to avoid it as much as possible. Thankfully, it's a real simple thing to fix. Here's how. First, find your ISO setting and take it from being on auto, change it to the lowest number that you can see. For most action cameras, this is going to be around about 100, but if it's lowest as 200 or 400, whatever, just select that. Whatever's the lowest number works well. By doing this, we've now locked our ISO at the lowest sensitivity, meaning that we're now going to have the least noise in our video as possible, and it'll also be locked at that exposure now as well. To add a cherry on top here, with less noise, you're automatically giving yourself the highest quality footage that your camera can naturally capture. And to top all of that off, a little pro tip is that if you find yourself filming on a day when there's changing light or you're going from outside to inside, you can tweak the rule that we literally just created. What I suggest you do here is change your ISO back to auto, but set up some ISO limits and put them between 100 and 400. This is going to stop your ISO going to crazy high numbers and just ruining your shot, but it's also going to allow a little bit of flexibility in difficult lighting situations. Okay, so now we've got those three initial links all connected up, and it's at this stage that if you only want the basic no editing required stuff, you've reached the end of the road. But without actually needing any editing knowledge or experience, if you want to achieve the best looking cinematic footage possible, then these next two chain links are essential and simple. If you've ever watched some of Johnny FPV's older videos when he just used the GoPro on his drones, you're going to notice that there is one massive difference between his videos and so many others of that time. That difference all comes down to how damn smooth his footage looked. It was achieved in two very simple ways. The first is seemingly obvious, yet no one ever really seems to talk about it. Johnny FPV is obviously an insanely talented pilot with hundreds, if not thousands of hours of flying behind him. Thanks to the sheer amount of practice that he's had, he's actually able to limit the amount of sudden jerks and, well, quick flicks that his drone makes. This in turn makes the footage buttery smooth, and by trying to fly a little slower and smoother, you're gonna find that your cinematic footage just becomes so much more flowy to watch. But that's not where we stop today. Oh no! Sure, you can use that built-in stabilization method that are offered on like the GoPros with GoPro Hypersmooth or DJI's Rocksteady, but the real magic comes in when we turn those built-in methods off completely. Instead, once we've filmed all of our footage with absolutely zero stabilization, we bring it onto our computer or our phone and run it through a free stabilization software called RealSteady. Okay, I completely screwed up here. what I ended up saying is real steady, and I say that multiple more times as we go through in the video. What I actually meant to say it was gyro flow, so from now on, whenever I say real steady, imagine I'm talking about gyro flow, okay? Old habits die hard, I'm sorry. Gyro flow, gyro flow, gyro flow. Back to the video. These are my personal favorite settings to use on pretty much every flight, as they allow for a bit of natural movement, but it also takes out all of those little small corrections and errors that I do make while flying. The added beauty of Real Steady 2 is the fact that you're not actually limited if you don't have a computer to use. This is thanks to there being an app on your phone that does the exact same thing. And I mean, sure, it might take a wee bit longer, but hey, if it's your only option, it's a blimmin' good one. Now, if you're thinking that all this extra work seems pointless because you could just use the stabilization built into your camera, please allow me to very quickly show you why you don't want to take the lazy way. It all comes down to the way that the video is processed and what information is being used to stabilize your footage. The built-in camera stabilization systems use real-time information to stabilize your footage, meaning there's kind of a bunch of guesswork into what's going to happen next, and then some very fast real-time corrections as things are being filmed. These systems are absolutely fantastic, and we have come a very long way over the past few years. However, because it doesn't actually know what's coming up next in terms of camera movements, it is limited in what it can possibly achieve. Swap on over to post-processing, however, and you'll be met with literally the most perfect stabilization possible. This next level of stabilization is enabled by the fact that you're giving Real Steady all of the information of the entire video, which it can then take and use to craft the perfect stabilization over the whole clip. It already knows what's going to happen next, it already knows how everything ends, and so armed with that knowledge, it simply provides you with the best stabilization possible. Okay, so that then leads us on to the fifth link. For this link, we'll be starting off within the settings of your camera yet again, and instead of making your footage look better, we're about to make it look a whole lot worse. Don't worry, I'll explain why very soon. Within your settings, you're going to want to change your camera color profile from whatever neutral or standard one that it's currently using over to the grayest, blandest, and most boring one that is possibly available. This option is going to be called a whole bunch of different names on different cameras, and some cameras won't actually even have the option of changing it at all, like the DJI Neo. Don't stress though, this chain link is still ridiculously helpful regardless. Now, by making your video footage look like crap, what you've just done is actually forced your camera into capturing the best and highest quality footage that it can possibly record. It's now just up to you to make it look good again. But fear not, I've got 3 very simple things for you to do no matter what application you use, be that a more professional editing program like Final Cut Pro on Mac, or something as simple as CapCut on your phone. What we're going to do is take your beautifully stabilized, motion blurred and locked exposure video and import it right on into your application. From here, you'll need to head over to what's commonly known as the color curve setting. Don't stress about complexity here though, this is about as difficult as it's actually going to get. Here, we're going to bring some contrast back in by adding a point to this part of the line and dragging it down a bit, and then another point to this part of the line and dragging it up a bit. What you've just created is known as an S-curve, and it is my personal favorite way to bring some life back into your video. The next step is to go to your saturation settings. This usually comes in the form of a slider of some sort, and all you need to do here is bring that slider up a little bit until you get some good looking color back into things. But beware, you do need to be super careful to not oversaturate your shot, otherwise you're going to ruin those cinematic vibes super quickly. When the saturation is adjusted too high, it'll pump all of the colors up and it's going to make the video look so unnatural that it'll simply end up looking terrible. So seriously, it's always better to have a little bit less saturation than too much in this case. Now, this third thing is totally up to you, and in fact there will be an entire crowd of people telling you not to do this as it ruins the aesthetic of your footage, but hey, I use it on nearly every video and I love the look of it. So again, it's totally your personal choice. What is this polarizing thing then though, you may be wondering? Well, it's all to do with traditional T&O film. T&O stands for teal and orange and refers to the color grading of your video, taking it from this to this, which is a pretty nice difference in my opinion. To simply achieve this look without the need of actually adjusting the colors yourself, which can get a little tad difficult. All you need to do is add a teal and orange LUT if you're using a professional editing program, or add a teal and orange filter to your video if you're in something like CapCut. There are so many free options that all offer different variations, hence why I'm not recommending any particular one. Instead, just find one that you love the look of and pop it in over your video. So throughout this process, you've taken your own footage from looking like this to a way more cinematic video that looks like this. But knowing how to get cinematic footage is kind of just the tip of the iceberg if you want to film actually good footage. You've got to know how to stop burnout, how to spend less money, and most importantly, how to improve your drone flying skills fast. Thankfully, that is where this video comes right on into play. In it, I show you everything that I've learned from flying FPV drones for the past 1,000 hours, including my method to stopping burnout, spending less money, and improving my skills faster than ever before. I'll see you on over there.